Good afternoon, and welcome to yet another extremely topical and extremely timely EMET webinar. Tomorrow in Vienna, after a brief hiatus, the P5+1 nations, Russia, China, the United States, Great Britain, France, and Germany, with the United States not even allowed in the same room, will resume their discussions with the Islamic Republic of Iran in Vienna. And Israel and the Gulf states, who are most immediately and directly impacted by these talks, are not even a party to the talks. And although most of the other parties in Vienna are there under the pretense that they are there to prevent Iran from crossing the nuclear threshold, Iranian chief negotiator Ali Bagheri Khani said that, quote, the very term nuclear negotiations is rife with error. He felt that the entire goal of negotiations is, quote, to remove the unlawful and inhuman sanctions. Here at EMET, we talk on an almost daily basis with members of Congress or their staffers, and we try to hit home with the point that this is not just about Israel and the Middle East, but with an Iran with hegemonic ambitions and Hezbollah bases on the tri-border areas of South America and Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil, that this will come back and bite us in the backside here in the United States. But we all know that Israel is on the front line of attack. Just about a week ago, the military spokesman of Iran, Abolfazl Shekarchi, said, quote, we will not back off from the annihilation of Israel even 1 millimeter. We want to destroy Zionism in the world. We are incredibly honored to have with us today Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser to describe the view from Jerusalem of what is taking place in Vienna. General Kuperwasser is director of the Project on Regional Middle East Developments at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. He was formerly Director General of the Israeli Military Ministry of Strategic Affairs and head of the research division of the IDF Military Intelligence. He has published scores and scores of articles and policy papers in most major journals throughout the world. He's also one of the founders of the IDSF, in Hebrew, Habitonistim, a movement that guides the narrative of Israel's national security needs. It is an organization of approximately 3,000 reserve officers and operators from the IDF, Mossad, Shin Bet, and the Israeli police. The IDSF promotes a realistic vision of Israel's national security needs based on objective military principles. Yossi, in your view, what is the general feeling in Israel about the talks in Vienna? And does this feeling just apply to the right wing of the Israeli populations, or does it go across the political spectrum?
Oh, good noon for you, and good evening here in Israel. It's a pleasure to be on an EMET program. I think I've done it once somewhere like almost 2 years ago. It was a pleasure then, and I'm sure it's going to be a pleasure again. And first of all, I have to say that how much I appreciate what you're doing and how important it is to have somebody speaking the truth in truth, which is EMET in Washington. Now, about the feeling in Israel, I think, first of all, the feeling in Israel is common to everybody. Everybody is worried. Everybody is worried because what we see in Vienna is very concerning. We realize that what we want to see as an outcome of these talks is not going to materialize. And this by itself makes us concerned because you just mentioned what are the goals of the Iranians. They want to annihilate us, okay? So the idea that they will be able to stick to their capabilities, to move forward with their program, to have the ability to produce a nuclear weapon sooner or later, and maybe even many nuclear weapons, is something that makes us really very worried and concerned. Now, the problem is that another reason why we are concerned is that we have a limited capability to impact the result of these talks. because it doesn't matter how much we keep telling the Americans what we think the results of these talks should be. They seem to ignore it. They stick to their own plan, and I don't see any change in their plans. And fortunately, the Iranians are not ready to accept their plan, the American plan. Fortunately, they could have easily accept the American plan and move forward towards having the capability to produce a big arsenal of nuclear weapons in 10 years, and even be hugged and kissed by the Americans and the Europeans, and be seen as those who saved the day and helped the international community and the United States to avoid the possibility of conflict and confrontation and escalation and all of that. And they could, and they still can do it in any given day if they decide to do that. But they believe that, fortunately, they believe that the United States is so weak, following what happened in Afghanistan, following the fact that the United States doesn't retaliate to any of their steps recently. The fact that they took steps that violate the JCPOA, but also steps that violate the NPT itself. And without any reaction from the United States, they prevent the IAEA inspectors from having real monitoring in Iran. No response. They attacked the American base in Tanf in Syria. No response. They move forward on issues that are totally and solely related to the production of nuclear weapons, like the production of uranium metal. No response. 60% uranium enrichment, no response. 20%, no response. So placing IR6 advanced centrifuges in Fordow just during the negotiations last week, no response. They say to themselves, why should we even bother to accept the nice proposal of the Americans? We can get even better. And so they're trying to first of all, use the time in order to make progress on their program to get closer and closer to becoming nuclear threshold state that can have enough fissile material for a nuclear device, and at the same time put pressure on the Americans to accept a better deal for Iran. And we look at that and we said, what's going on here? Who is the superpower? Is the United States a superpower, or is Iran the superpower? And who dictates to whom the terms? And that makes us even more concerned. We are concerned with Iran anyhow, but we are even more concerned with the fact that the Americans have decided to leave the Middle East in the hands of the Iranians, and to give up on their status as a superpower in the Middle East. That is an even greater concern for us, because the United States is our most important ally. Our security depends to some extent on our capability to cooperate with the United States. There was in the past some sort of an understanding between us and the Americans that while we take care of the immediate threats like the Palestinians, like Hezbollah, like Syria, everything that's happening around us, we even take care of threats that emanate from a little bit farther. Iraq, we took care of the nuclear reactor in Iraq. The far northern part of Syria, we took care of a nuclear reactor over there. But America should take care of the third tier of threats that emanate from farther places like Iran. And unfortunately, we cannot rely on that anymore. And this is another concern, because this means that we have to develop our own capability to deal with this matter, with these threats. And this is an extremely costly burden for a small country like Israel. We are, in the end of the day, only less than 10 million people, danced in a very small piece of land. So it's with all the might that we have, and we do have, and with our commitment to be able to defend ourselves by ourselves, that we are committed to, we did have this understanding with the Americans that when it comes to the farther threats, it's going to be something that's going to be taken care of by the United States. And now it's clear that this is not so easy to rely on the United States for that purpose. And that's another source of concern. So we have a lot of concern, and we have to get prepared to deal with these concerns and to do something about them, because we cannot afford a situation where the Iranians become a threshold nuclear state. So it's we have to make sure that we have the capability to deal with this matter. It was a long answer to a short question.
No, no, it's very involved, and it's a very difficult decision for the military establishment to have to make, because we know that Hezbollah has 130 to 150,000 missiles on Israel's north, at least 100 of which have been turned into precision-guided munitions, which can
No. The number of precisely guided munition weapons that Hezbollah has is much less. They have 100 more thousand rockets, mostly rockets.
Yeah, no, 100 of which are
okay.
precision-guided munitions, right, right, 100 of which are, so it's a very difficult decision, because those precision-guided munitions can be directed precisely, to the Kiryat, the Pentagon, to the Dibona nuclear reactor, and or to hospitals, to the electric grid. So this is not an enviable position for the state of Israel to be in. So would it be, if Israel does decide to at least take out some of the nuclear sites, are they prepared to do that simultaneously with an attack on Hezbollah's missiles?
Without going into details of military planning, but definitely Israel understands that if eventually it will have to take action against the Iranian nuclear facilities, and we will try to avoid that and defer that as much as we can. We don't want to be there. We would definitely rather see the Americans doing what they have to do, and that's our main effort, is to convince the Americans to do what they have to do. But even if the Americans do what they have to do, even in this eventuality, we think that one of the things that can happen is, and that is what the Iranians are busy, extremely busy doing in the last couple of years, and especially in the last couple of months, is deliver to Hezbollah the capabilities to have more precisely guided munitions, not only hundreds or thousands, but many thousands. And that's something that we are dealing with as we speak, because it's not only that we shall have to face the results of that effort when something happens. First of all, we have to prevent that from happening. And what we're doing day in, day out is carrying out all kinds of activities, especially inside Syria, to thwart the Iranian effort to deliver these weapons to Hezbollah. And you saw probably last night, there was some reports in foreign press by the Syrians that there was an attack on 3 targets near the coast in Latakia and then elsewhere. And actually, in the last couple of months, we allegedly, unless it was the Swiss army, we keep attacking Iranian targets in Syria very intensively. So this is the first thing we have to do in this respect. And then we have to be able to protect ourselves as much as we can. This is not going to be a foolproof defense. Maybe not even the 90% defense that we have vis-a-vis Hamas, the Iron Dome. But we shall have some level of capability to intercept incoming missiles by Hezbollah. And as you know, we have developed the David Sling capability on top of the Iron Dome, and together with the Chetz, with the arrow, we have 3 layers of defense, of active defense against incoming missiles coming from the north. It's going to mitigate the impact of the this threat, but it's not going to annul it. We have to remember that. So, but we take this into account. We do take this into account. But what is the alternative? Allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. This is even a worse alternative. So that's why we in Israel understand that, yes, it's going to be nasty. It's going to be painful. There are going to be casualties. But in the end of the day, the price we shall pay for preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon is going to be less than the price we should pay if we allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And we do our best to minimize the price, but we cannot avoid completely paying it.
Yes, see, every year America appropriates and reappropriates millions of American taxpayers' dollars to the Lebanese armed forces under the assumption that they are going to be some sort of leverage or bulwark against Hezbollah. Yet the government of Lebanon is controlled by Hezbollah. Do you have any feelings about the U.S. taxpayers' dollars going to the LAF?
Well, I think basically that support for the Lebanese state, I'm totally in favor of supporting the Lebanese state, should be dependent on the Lebanese state being the sole owner of military capability in Lebanon, and having the monopoly over the use of force in Lebanon. Because in a situation where the Lebanese armed forces is only secondary in its ability to control the use of force from Lebanon, this is not helpful, especially as the Hezbollah has a lot of control over what Lebanese armed forces are doing as well, not only about the state of Lebanon. So it's a very complicated situation. And we saw in recent month, I think it was in June, if I remember correctly, that when Hezbollah decided to launch rockets towards Israel, it didn't ask the Lebanese armed forces for permission. It wasn't worried about the Lebanese armed forces that may intervene and prevent it from doing that. The only people who took the streets in order to stop Hezbollah were the villagers of Shoyas that felt that they don't want to be a target of an Israeli retaliation when Hezbollah launched rockets from nearby their village. So this is an unacceptable situation, and as long as nothing happens in this respect, and look, the logic is just strange, because the people of Lebanon, many of them, want to see this change. They want to see the monopoly over the use of force and the monopoly of the possession of weapons staying with the Lebanese state. They go to the streets and demonstrate against the situation and demonstrate against Hezbollah. Now, when you give weapons to the Lebanese armed forces without demanding that this change will take place, you're actually acting against these people who are suffering from the results of letting Lebanon being ruled by Hezbollah and basically by Iran. That's counterproductive. It's beyond my understanding why they're doing that, but at least they do it only to a limited level, not billions of dollars.
Right. So recently, the Emiratis have decided that they are going to be traveling to Iran to speak with the Islamic Republic. Do you think this has something to do with this withering of America's, or corrosion of America's international credibility in the world, and the kind of cold wind that's been blowing between the Biden administration and the state of Israel recently?
No, I don't think there's a cold wind. Disagreements. I don't think there's a cold wind. Disagreements. But I think with the Emirati decision, first of all, it's a part of a new wave of rapprochement that is happening all over the Middle East right now. So everybody is becoming friends of everybody that they didn't meet, didn't go to see and visit for a long time. So the Emiratis go to Syria, the Emiratis go to Turkey, the Emiratis go to Iran. They go everywhere all of a sudden because they've decided that something has to change in their relations with these countries. The reason for that is not the cold wind between Israel and the United States, that, as I said, I don't think there is a cold wind, but what is motivating the Iranians is the decision of the Americans to leave the Middle East. And when the superpower leaves and decides that it doesn't want to be a superpower anymore, that is a very noisy wake-up call for the Emiratis, because they base their power on the fact that there is a strong United States in the Middle East that you can rely upon. When they leave, the Iranian threat becomes much more dominant, and they want to somehow make it less threatening. So that's the reason that stands behind everything they're doing right now. This is not necessarily on the expense of the relations with Israel, because they also think that Israel is a strong force that they should rely upon and they should develop their relations with. Also in an attempt to compensate for the leaving of the United States. But I think everything that it started right after President Biden came to power, but the way the Americans left Afghanistan had the really very strong impact on the Emiratis. They were totally astonished to see how this is going on, and they immediately had to make all kinds of changes in their foreign policy.
Right. So getting back to the talks in Vienna, do you believe that after, Iran is enriching at least 17 kilograms to 25 kilograms at the 60% level, which is an easy glide to the 90% level. And as you mentioned, they're installing the IR6 centrifuges in Fordo, where they're not even allowed under the JCPOA to have any kind of nuclear activity. And they have not been allowing the IAEA inspectors in to certain suspicious sites. After this, do you believe that the people that are gathering in Vienna actually believe that you can put the cat back in the bag? Isn't it too late? Or are they just doing this to put a check in the box that they've tried diplomacy? Or do you think they're just apathetic and they don't care and this is just lip service? What's your general intention?
I think they do understand how different the situation today is, and how it's really ridiculous to speak about coming back to the old JCPOA, because there's no way to come back to the JCPOA. The Iranians have already developed the IR6, the IR4, the IR2M, they're working on the IR8, they're working on the IR9. They already know the most important thing. They already know how to produce uranium metal. That's something that is solely necessary for military purposes. They know how to enrich uranium to 60%. It's all of that is behind us. So even if they go back to the agreement, things that should have happened in year 10 have already happened, and you cannot take away the knowledge from the Iranians. So there's no point that this entire talk about going back to the original JCPOA is sheer nonsense, and the Americans know that. As a matter of fact, they even refer to that from time to time. So it's not that they don't know that. But what's bothering the Americans is to avoid conflict. Now, they don't want to have any conflict with the Iranians, and they're ready to pay a very heavy price, because they would let the Iranians have this entire knowledge that and know-how that they've developed, and still are ready to give up all the sanctions. It's, definitely all the sanctions that are related to the nuclear issue, and the Iranians demand that other sanctions will be lifted as well. So it's that is, and the debate, the Iranians were very successful in framing the debate about the question of whether all the sanctions are going to be lifted or only part of the sanctions. What about all these things that you have already done? What about improving I mean, the Americans were speaking, because they knew that everything that I'm saying right now. So in the beginning, they were saying, okay, yes, we should go back to the JCPOA, but this is only going to be a first step on the way to a longer and stronger and better agreement. They don't even speak this way anymore. They don't mention it. It's look, the JCPOA, even if we could have gone back to the JCPOA, it would be a disaster. Even if we could, it's because the JCPOA by itself is a disaster. In the JCPOA doesn't deal with, it has no real monitoring. The monitoring is only in the declared sites. And you can say everything you want to say about the Iranians, how bad they are, but stupid they are not. They are not going to work on have some clandestine activity and weaponization of their uranium in the declared sites. No, this is not going to happen. So there's no real monitoring. It's not anytime, anywhere. It's only where they're in the declared site or in areas that you want to go to the committee that has to approve your request for an inspection in undeclared site, and you have to explain, you have to expose your intelligence resources, you know, to explain why you think there is something over there. And this is not going to happen. It's, so there's no real monitoring. Secondly, there's no real monitoring because the real problem is the know-how that the experts, that the scientists have, those who deal with the weaponization, like the late Fakhri Zadeh and others. It's, but the agreement doesn't allow you any contact with those scientists. So you don't know where are they? They might be, as we speak, and I think they are, as we speak, working on the necessary knowledge that they still lack for producing a nuclear weapon, if they still lack any. But you don't know and you can't know. And this entire agreement was based on a big big Iranian lie. This entire agreement was based on the readiness of General Director of IAEA at the time, Yuki Amano, to say that we don't know enough about the potential military dimensions of the Iranian project, but nevertheless, let's enter the deal. That's what he wrote on 15th of December, 2015. And this allowed the agreement to enter. But now we already know. Now we know that the Iranians were lying. We know that there were at least 4 sites in which the Iranians made all kinds of activities with uranium. In Turkusabad, in Abadeh, in Tehran, in other places. We know that their activities in Perchin were much bigger than what we knew before we wrote the archives of the nuclear program. We know all of that. So what are we going to do? To close our eyes and still accept the nuclear program? It's what's happening here. And the Iranians never gave any answer to the question of what have you actually done in Turkusabad and all these places, and where is this uranium? Where is this uranium that you took away from them? You breached, severely breached the NPT itself, but by not declaring about the presence of this uranium in your possession. And this is crazy. And and in spite of all of that, the Americans want to re-enter the JCPOA. Well, there's no such thing. It's totally ridiculous. So at least you have to insist on having a better and stronger deal that give us all the information about the potential military dimensions, so we will know what actually is your situation regarding the capability to go for nuclear weapon. We need to know that. It's without it, there should be no coming back to any agreement. That's a clear first step that the Iranians have to make before any move is being done. No such request. You hear no such request from the Americans. What's happening? What's going on here? It's the second thing is that Fordow has to be dismantled. Fordow was built for one purpose. It's a location inside the mountain, 60 meters inside the mountain, with space for only 3,000 centrifuges. 3,000. Nobody builds something like that for any other purpose but military purposes. This should have been destroyed, and the Americans should insist on the destruction of Fordow. No, they allowed. What do you think the Iranians are going to do with Fordow? What do they need it for? Are they really going to use it for medical research? What is this nonsense? Fordo should be dismantled. And there are so many other problems with this agreement. That yes, in the short term, I understood that the Iranians gave up some of the enriched uranium they had, and the immediate threat was a little bit postponed. But it's not, the idea of the American administration is that, okay, but at least we kick the can down the road, right? But this can has a very strange characteristic. When you kick it, it grows. And every move you make and you kick it down another, it grows and grows and grows. And in the end, it blows in your face. It's huge, it blows in your face. This is the can that you're kicking. And it makes no sense. It makes no sense. The idea of this is, it's not, this explosion is not going to happen in our term. Somebody else will have to deal with it. So let's leave it to the next administration. Let's leave it to the next generation, and they will have to deal with it. We cannot afford that in Israel. We have a commitment to our next generation. We have a commitment to our children that we should not leave them under this kind of threat, and we cannot afford to tell them, listen, you'll deal with that. It's totally unacceptable for us. We are not going to do that to our children. We love our children.
One final question for me before I turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Hussein Abu Bakr Mansour, to read the questions from the audience. And that is, when push comes to shove and Israel feels that they have no other option, but they have to take out the Iranian nuclear threat by themselves, does Israel have the tools in its toolbox? Does it have everything they need? And do you think that America will be there at least to back them up with the right kind of military weapons that you might need?
Coming from the military, I always know that we never have enough. We always need more to feel more confident that we can do the job. But at the end of the day, when you are told to do the job, you do it with whatever you have. In most cases, we are quite successful. Not always, but usually we are quite successful. And yes, if push comes to shove, as you say, we shall do our best. I think it's going to be effective. Okay, I think so. We would like very much to have American backing. We would even more so like to have American support. And the best thing we can look for is American involvement. Can we expect that? Tell you, I've been to Washington a month ago, and speaking with a lot of people. Nobody told me that we can expect any of these, not even backing. Some high-level politicians took me and said, "What is going to happen? What do you think we should do? What do you think we should do?" And I told them, "Put some pressure on the Iranians," but nobody promised me anything. And so this means that we have to spend more of our resources in getting more and more prepared, while keep pondering on the American door to try to convince the Americans to change their attitude. And I think we have a very strong case. We have a great case to explain why they should change their attitude. But while doing that, we should work hard to improve our capabilities, so that if there's no other way, we have to do what we have to do. We shall be able to do it in the best way we can. You never get to the perfect position. Look, we have to remember, Israel is not the United States. Okay, that's we are much smaller. We are not a superpower. We are strong. We are strong power. We are capable. But when we see the B-2 flying over our territory in a message to the Iranians that the Americans have a B-2 and they can do you a lot of damage, cause you a lot of damage, we at the same time say to ourselves, yeah, but we don't have a B-2. We would like to have a B-2, but we don't have it. So we cannot carry the Moab and bomb the necessary locations in Iran. So we have more limited capabilities than the United States. But with what we have, we should do our best. If put to the corner, push to the corner.
It is just incredibly amazing to me that tiny Israel, with a population, as you say, of less than 10 million people, 9.5 million people or so, is doing the job to protect really the rest of the world, because eventually this will all come back to haunt the United States and to the rest of them, because Iran does have hegemonic ambitions, and it is not just about.
Sure. Iran is a missionary regime that wants to spread its mission, its ideology all over the Middle East, to get rid of Israel, and to spread its influence all over the world. Once they're becoming a nuclear superpower, this is what they're going to look for. That's the message of Islam. The way they see it is not only for the Muslims. It's not only for the people living in the Middle East. It's for the entire world. Everybody should be a Muslim, and that is the message they're trying to send. Yeah, and by the way, talking what you said about our contribution to the security of the free world. Look, we got used to that. We got used to first working for the benefit of the entire free world. I'm coming from the intelligence, from the Israeli intelligence. Israeli intelligence is busy all the time protecting the entire Western world, not the entire free world, not only Israel. We, as you know, share information with so many people around the world that saves lives all over the world. We got used to that. Also, with everything that we have developed, we helped the entire world be better protected and safer. All the technologies we have developed are used by the Americans, by everybody else. We have just hosted here, I think today or yesterday, the president of Cyprus and the prime minister of Greece. We sell them weapons that make a big difference in their ability to defend themselves, as we did with many others. Yes, we have, in spite of being less than 10 million people, and not all of them are serving in the military. That's only part of them. It's we are very capable, and we like it. We are happily contributing to everybody. It's because we understand that the West should stand together and protect itself. It's everybody for each one of the members. We should be committed to the security of everybody. We expect everybody to be committed to our security as well, but not everybody can do that.
All right, now it's my supreme honor to turn the podium over to my wonderful colleague, Hussein Abubakr Mansour, who will read some of the questions that have come in. Hussein?
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you very much, Yossi, for such a presentation that offered some very comforting voice of good Israeli security confidence. I personally appreciate it, and I think a lot of our audience does too. I want to thank our audiences who tuned in and sent us questions. We received a lot of questions, as you may imagine. Can't really tell, we're probably not going to have all the time to go through a lot of them, but I'm going to combine much of them as possible. I'm going to actually start from what you ended with, because we received a number of questions basically asking about the Iranian nuclear program and how much of it is motivated by just hard power, realist calculations of geopolitics, and how much of it is ideologically motivated by the ideational factors of their Islamic ideology, their reliance in Quranic verses that asks them to dominate the world?
Well, it's a combination of both. It's very difficult for me to say what percentage is coming from the first one and what percentage is coming from the second, because this regime is Iranian revolution. Okay, the Islamic Republic of Iran. So there's Islamic and there's Iran, and both of them. It's not like the caliphate of ISIS that was less about being Syrian or Iraqi. It was mainly a caliphate for all Muslims and represented the Ummah al-Islamiyya, the Islamic nation. And, the Iranians, though they want to represent all the Islam, at the same time they are very Iranian. And they want to become a superpower, and they want to use this superpower level of statute in order to spread their mission. And this is all over the, if you read what the Iranians are saying, that's very clear. We want this power because Iran has to be big, but we all want this power in order to spread our ideology. And they really believe that with nuclear weapons, although they, there's a story about the fatwa that prevents them from having nuclear weapons, but as they explained, this fatwa can be changed easily. So it's we don't have to be misled by this fatwa, and we have to understand what they're trying to do is to spread their ideology. Now, their ideology means that the entire world should be Muslim. That's the purpose. That's the jihad they are fighting for. They are committing, and in their mind, there's no problem in making a big sacrifice for that because of what they understand from the way they read the Quran. There is this verse in the Quran that explains that if you lose your life in the sake of Allah, the path of Allah, then you're not dead, you are alive. And, Allah takes care of your whatever you need. So it's they're really believing it. It's they're ready to sacrifice. They have battalions of suiciders. Who's going to have battalions of suiciders? They believe this is something that justified dying for. That said, we have to go back to what they are not ready to sacrifice, and take advantage of the fact that they don't want to sacrifice the fact that they control Iran. The survival of the regime is something that they don't want to sacrifice because they understand that if they lose the control of Iran, then the repercussions are going to be that they won't be able to promote the idea of spreading Islam all over the world. And that was the idea behind putting pressure on them. Putting a pressure on them that may pose some threat to the stability of the regime and the survival of the regime. And what we're seeing today in Iran is that the population of Iran is totally fed up with this regime, with the exception of those who are really living from the regime and are part of it. The rest of the population in Iran, look, I recommend everybody to see the footage coming out of Isfahan recently in the last couple of weeks. Millions of people are in the street shouting against the regime. And this was happening before in many other places in Iran. The population of Iran is really fed up with this organization. Just now that we are finally at the point where the population is totally fed up and ready to step into the street in spite of the huge risk they take when they do that, because they can be shot at, and some of them were shot at. In spite of that, they are ready to go to the streets. When this is the situation, the time is to put more pressure and to make it clear to the people of Iran, get rid of this regime. And that is going to change the entire situation. Instead, what we see that the Americans are looking for a way to help the regime overcome the trouble and by removing the sanctions. And the Iranians think, from our point of view, as Sarah mentioned before, from our point of view, the only thing that we came to Vienna for is to lift the sanctions, which tells you how painful the sanctions are for them. So this is a time to put pressure on the Iran, and that is going to be, Iran may remain a great place, and the Iranian people, we have nothing against the Iranian people, just on the opposite. We are totally in favor of the Iranians having a wonderful life, but there is a threat that is coming from the existence of an Islamic, extremely radical regime in Iran is going to disappear. That should be the strategic goal. The strategic goal is not to postpone the time in which the Iranians are going to have a nuclear weapon. This is not a strategic goal. The strategic goal is to make sure that we get rid of the threat of a nuclear Iran. And the way really to do that is to help the people of Iran to have a better leadership, a better rule.
This is the perfect segue actually to my next question, though I suspect that you already answered it. If and when the shovel comes to shove and it's time for Israel to make a strike to take out the Iranian nuclear infrastructure, maybe Israel alone, maybe Israel with allies, do you believe that Israel should limit such a strike to taking out the nuclear capabilities, or should it widen it to include the strategic goal of trying to provoke a regime change in Iran?
No, I think a regime change is something for the Iranian people to do. It has to come from the Iranians. And I know how difficult it is. I know how determined this regime is to stay in power. But in the end of the day, this is something for the Iranian people to do. From time to time, I speak with Iranians, and they say they are a little bit upset. And say, well, you Israelis and your American friends, all they want to do is to make sure that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. You don't care about us. You don't take any steps just because we are living on this dreadful regime. You don't mind that we are suffering under these crazy Islamic radicals that make our life hell. That we have no civil rights, no human rights. You don't care about that. I think the international community should show some, or not only some, but much more sensitivity and caring about the conditions of the Iranian people. There is an international rapporteur who issues reports about human rights conditions in Iran, and every time the report is so terrible, and nobody does anything about it. From time to time, a certain person will get involved in executing some Iranians, so he's on the list of sanctions of the United States. That's not going to be really impressive for the people of Iran. When there were these riots in demonstrations in Isfahan, I didn't hear anybody saying, "Well, these people should be heard." And I think we should be more ready to listen to them and to show some sympathy for the suffering people of Iran. But that said, in the end of the day, the regime change is not something that anybody from the outside can do. It was never a good idea. The Iranian people should do that. There are so many Iranians are committed to that. It's up to them.
Thank you. And as a person who grew up in the Middle East and understands, of course, how terrible it is to live under authoritarian Middle Eastern regimes, especially if it was Islamic, I completely agree with you, and my heart goes out to all the Iranian people. We received a number of questions asking pretty much the same thing, so I'm gonna try to frame it in the crudest way possible. There is a rising impression among a lot of people, American Jews and Zionists and others, that the American political establishment is basically throwing Israel under the bus. Do you believe that this is true? And if so, why?
No, I don't believe it's true. I don't believe they are throwing us under the bus. We have disagreements. And these disagreements are frustrating sometimes, and makes you feel that, oh, they're throwing me under the bus. But I don't think so. I think that it's deeper than that. I mean, there is an American commitment to the security of Israel that is manifested again and again in the very warm security relations and very close security relations, and in the American support for Israel, both politically and economically and security-wise. All of that is happening, and the closeness between us and the Americans when it comes to worldviews is even there. We don't have a better friend than the United States, regardless of who's in power. So I don't think that we should go that far and say we are being thrown under the bus. But there is a but. I'm not saying a big but or small but. There is a but, and the but is that there's a difference. There are two buts, I would say. First is that there's a difference between the worldview that we have and the worldview of the Democratic Party. And that's why we have a disagreement with at least some of the Democratic Party. Not all, maybe, but parts of the Democratic Party. We look differently at things. We look differently at the role of power in international relations. We look differently at the timetables. We look differently at the way in which we would like to see Iran not being able to have nuclear weapons. We look differently at the question of what is necessary for Israel's security and what is less necessary when it comes to the Palestinian issue. We look differently at the question of two states. The Americans are ready from time to time, not the president, by the way, but many people in State Department would speak about two-state solution. We say, no, two states for two peoples with mutual recognition between Israel as a nation state of the Jewish people and the Palestinian entity, maybe a state, as the nation state of the Palestinian people. It's this long sentence has to be kept in mind when we look at this. So all these are things that where we disagree, and we have to live with disagreement and explain to each other. The other thing, in my mind, that is a source of the but is that for us, a Middle East without the United States is extremely dangerous. And we really highly appreciate the role of the United States as a stabilizer of the Middle East. And the Americans have decided to pivot to Asia, to look at China as their main problem. And this causes some more basic tension between us and or basic disagreement between us and the Americans. Because for many years, our cooperation with the Americans was not based only on common values and the mutual commitment to the security of each other, but also on the idea that there is some strategic underpinning of our relationship that guarantees the continuity of this mutual commitment. And be it when in the days of the Cold War, we were on the same side. Be it when there was the big war on terror, we were definitely on the same side. When we were fighting against radicalism in the Middle East, we were on the same side. Today, when the Americans are so focused on Iran, on China, and lose interest in the Middle East, we have to reinvent this underpinning. And that's something that we have to deal with. And we see that the Americans have expectations from us on the Chinese issue. That for us is not such a big deal. But yes, we are ready to cooperate. But for Israel, the Chinese issue is not the most important thing. We have Iran on our list much higher than China.
Thank you. We've received a lot of very interesting questions. I really feel bad that we're not going to have the time to go through most of them, really, but I'll try to do my best in the few minutes we have left. We've received a number of questions that basically asking, will Israel, before a confrontation with Iran, will Israel basically have to take care of Hamas and Hezbollah first, basically mowing the grass in their back and front yard first, before any sort of military confrontation with Iran?
Well, I'm not going to give here the recipe of military planning, but what I said is that we shall have to be ready if we are pushed to the point where we have to do something against Iran. We'll have to be ready to deal with the Iranian proxies And from an Israeli point of view, the situation, you look at the map that you've seen in the Middle East is not Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza Strip. What you see is the great Iran. That's the map we see. We have the great Iran. We have to take, if we take care of Iran, we have to take care of the great Iran. And then at least expect that we should be challenged from other locations in the great Iran, not only in the original Iran. And that's something that we have to take in our military planning, take into account in our military planning.
Thank you. We also received a number of questions, and I think it's a very important question. Assuming that Iran achieves nuclear capabilities, will it be possible to establish a nuclear deterrence system in the Middle East? That's something that is that can correspond roughly to MAD, the mutual assured destruction between the United States and the Soviet Union. Is it possible to have a system of nuclear deterrence, even if Iran gets, or if in the case Iran gets nuclear weapons?
Well, I doubt it very much. Okay, I doubt it very much because as we were speaking before about the radical nature of the Iranian state, and you know, even somebody who was the leader of the more realistic approach inside the Iranian leadership, the late Hashemi Rafsanjani, in 2003 explained that, look, if we attack Israel with 1 or 2 bombs, it will disappear. If Israel attacks us with as many bombs as they want, Iran will suffer but will not disappear. So it's this is the logic of the Iranian leadership. And look, Raisi is much more radical than Rafsanjani. So it's we have to bear that in mind. And of course, neither Rafsanjani and nor Raisi determines the policy, but it's Khamenei was not less radical than Raisi. So it's that's the way we have to, that's what we have to deal. That being said, coming back to what I said before, we can deter Iran as long as it is not nuclear. That we can do. And if we deter Iran enough, we can even force it, if they believe that there's a threat for their survival, the survival of the regime, we can even force it to accept a better deal than the one we have today. And that is the important thing. And and the Iranians have already twice in their history did something that they consider to be some sort of drinking the poisonous chalice, right? So it's, that's something that we should bear in mind. In some cases, where they feel that there is a threat to the regime, they can be deterred. And I think we should bring them to that point. And then the international community has the power to bring them to that point in the combination of economic sanctions, isolation, and a credible military option. And that should be the tools used in order to bring them back to where they should be and force them to give up. And yes, by the way, if they decide, what is their fear? Their fear is that if they are pushed into this corner and they have to accept another arrangement, it would be a message to the own public that they are weak. That's why they are so fearful of getting there, because they're afraid that once the public read their real capabilities, they would be more inclined to get to the street and ask for a change. And that's why they are so stubborn. So, and as long as they meet, on the other hand, not attitude, that means for them that they can keep on doing that instead of giving up any of their demands.
Okay, I think our time is beginning to come to a close, and we could speak to you, Yossi, for days and always learn a tremendous amount. I want to say a few things on closing. First of all, I cannot thank you, Yossi, enough for all of your wonderful work for the State of Israel that you continue to do to this day and beyond. And I have to say that I was very close friends with the late Ambassador Jean Kirkpatrick, And I remember when she told me the story of how President Ronald Reagan had asked her when she was the American ambassador to the United Nations to go to the floor of the United Nations and condemn Israel after you bombed the nuclear reactor in Asura, Iraq. And she said to me, Sarah, that was the worst day of my life. And I knew deep down in my gut that there will be a day that we will be grateful to Israel for doing that. And of course, that day did come. And I think that one day, the entire world will be incredibly grateful to Israel for doing what you have to do to survive by helping to remove the Iranian nuclear threat from the entire world. So I can't thank.
Let's hope this day will not come and the United States will join hands with Israel in doing what needs to be.
Yeah, and that is what EMET is working for every day. We try. We have many meetings a week on Capitol Hill, and we try very hard to move the needle a little bit to understand and appreciate the nature of the threat, not just to Israel and the region, but to the United States and the entire world. So, you know, I would like also at this point to make an appeal if people would like to support EMET, we could definitely use your help. And please try to get if you'd like to make a tax deduction in 2021, you know, in December, we could definitely use your support. We work incredibly hard because we really believe in what we do. And we have to be the voice of the EMET, the truth, on Capitol Hill. And we believe that Yossi, you and the wonderful people, the JCPOA and Bitochonistim, JCPA, not JCPOA, the JCPA, yes, are wonderful. The Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs are doing wonderful work, and the Habitachonistim are also doing phenomenal work, and we're honored and privileged to be associated with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. You're doing a great job too, and even you're doing a great job in pronouncing Habitachonistim. That's
all right. Thank you. To be continued. Okay. Thank you, and we will be signing off now. Thank you to all of you for joining.
Thank you.